What are some of the creepiest rabbit holes you have come across? Story 1. Green Children of Woolpit. Two kids randomly showed up out of nowhere in a village called Woolpit in England. Both the children were green and spoke an unknown language. Their skin lost its green color soon after, and they only ate beans. One of the kids died from an illness, and the other grew up and learned to speak English. She said she was from a different planet made up of green people. Anyways, this happened in the 12th century, and many don't think it actually happened. Story 2. Not creepy, maybe, but very curious and weird. That story about some person called Miss Scribe, who pretended to be several people in some Harry Potter forms just to create drama. I suppose the level of commitment and the depth of the web she spun makes it a bit creepy. I always wondered what went on in that mind. I can't stand the fandom community surrounding almost anything, but this does sound a lot like a good friend of mine. She's incredibly intelligent and has an almost superhuman ability to focus and plan things, especially when trying to manipulate people. Several years before we knew each other, she used to post on Harry Potter fan fiction sites, among other places, and eventually became a moderator on at least one of them. She understood the inner workings of their website backend better than the administrators did. So she would do all sorts of nefarious things to get back at them for perceived slights. Things like taking over the accounts of dead people and occasionally using them, keeping them warm for later use as zombie accounts to degrade the quality of the discourse and bully people who had harassed her before. It goes a lot deeper than that, but from what she's told me, it seems like she could be Miss Scribe. Story 3. Delta P and the Byford Dolphin incident is pretty darn creepy. It was an accident that took place on a diving bell for divers doing deep depth work in an oil rig. Essentially, the four-man dive team was supposed to enter a little dive bell, which was then brought onto the rig and attached to a larger decompression chamber by two dive tenders. The divers would enter the chamber's door would be sealed, and then the dive bell would be removed. After that, the divers would be free to slowly decompress in the relative safety of the chamber. At least, that was what was supposed to happen. Instead, the divers had entered the chamber when one of the tenders began to remove the bell without the chamber door being sealed. The one mystery in all this is why the render made that mistake, but it's possible exhaustion and difficulty hearing over noise on the rig played a role. Most newer chambers have safety systems that prevent the bell from being detached under pressure, but the old system on the Dolphin didn't, and the chamber was under a lot of pressure. The resulting explosive depressurization killed 5 out of the 6 people involved and left the surviving dive tender badly injured. 3 of the divers had their blood start to boil. The second the chamber failed, which caused the fat in their blood to separate and clump in a matter of seconds. The fourth diver, who was closest to the door, was instantly sucked through the 24-inch gap between the chamber and dive bell, shredding his body. The only real silver lining is that everyone who died did so pretty much instantly, likely without feeling any fear or pain. Story 4. CIA and projects of remote viewing. You don't keep a project for years without results. Stuff like MK Ultra and Bush War criminal torture camps. You can't tell me the CIA and FBI don't know something paradigm changing that they keep from us. Bob Lazar and everything he came out with. That one super secret clearance from the high up Joint Chief of Staff, who called a government agency, I believe National Reconnaissance Agency, saying, "I want to be brief on what you do. Essentially, no one here knows." And they said to this powerful man, "We know who you are, and if you needed to know something, well, tell you. There is surely a load of world-changing, life-changing information and techniques that could put us in a new age that are locked away under the keeping of 100 men." Story 5. I don't know if it's a well-known phenomena, but the Russian sleep experiment is a real horrifying story. I'll try my best to tell what it is, but there is a creepypasta on it. The Russian sleep experiment is an experiment where 4 prisoners were put on a gas supposed to make them not have to sleep. They were told if they didn't sleep for 30 days, they would be set free. Around the 15th day is when the gas started affecting them mentally. After using feces and book pages to block off the surveillance window, they started violently hurting themselves and others. Of course, this is when they tried to set the prisoners free. But when told this will happen, the scientists were greeted with a bone-chilling, "We no longer wish to be set free." I might have messed up some parts, but that's their overall story. Again, there are websites, a creepypasta, and a short film all about this. Story 6. Daniel Larson, a schizophrenic TikTok user, affected by grandiose delusions of being a world-famous singer and pop star. For years, he's been cyberstalked by a growing community dedicated to bullying him and interfering with his life, which has rendered him homeless. Everywhere he goes, he's being watched on his channel. When he goes into a restaurant, they'll call the restaurant and claim that he plans to expose himself in public, leading to his being banned from the premises. On some occasions, people from the subreddit have physically gone to Daniel and confronted him. Subreddit users actively conspire to terrorize him as much as they can. Story 7. Obligatory Spontaneous H. Average dude who had a degree, girlfriend, if I remember correctly, career, etc. He tried heroin and made a series of Reddit posts saying, "You guys don't know anything about it. I'm not addicted to it, and I won't be." Over like 12 years, he pops up every now and then talking about his addiction. He ruined his life and was trying all sorts of drugs. Eventually, he went to rehab, got cleaned up, relapsed, etc., etc. But even now, he's supposedly clean for a couple years. But he talks about how life lost its magic. How after trying heroin, it's good that everything else might as well be a pile of garbage to him. It totally destroys your perspective on how amazing the world around you is. Moral of the story? Just listen to people. It can happen to you. Don't try drugs. The best way to avoid getting addicted is to never even start. Story 8. There was a time when I'd put the TV on for background noise during the day, and shows like Dr. Phil would be on. I kept on hearing about kids being sent to Turnabout Ranch. Just out of curiosity one day, I looked it up. I remember going down a pretty weird rabbit hole that led me to CRC Health Group, and then to Aspen Education Group. I ended up reading about tons of abuse accusations made towards treatment centers owned by Aspen. Then I started reading about tough love, which apparently has had a lot of influence over Dr. Phil's and these treatment centers' treatment philosophy, and how this philosophy connects with behavior modification. Behavior modification brought me to such terrifying places as Elan School. I can't properly give a description of all of it, but start by looking up behavior modification, and then looking up the schools and treatment centers that use it. Story 9. Just today, I fell down the abandoned Rust Belt cities rabbit hole, like Ohio, Gary, Indiana, etc. But when I got to Detroit, it blew my mind. No one ever talks about Detroit or its history. I've only heard that it's dangerous and scary, but never why, never how it got that way. So I made my way through the wiki, subreddit, and did an extensive Google Maps trip during, like, check out the Packard building if you haven't. It messed me up emotionally. Detroit went from being the 5th biggest city in the US, competing with the likes of LA and NY in the 1950s, to a destroyed and abandoned city today with over 70,000 abandoned buildings, 30K of them being homes. It's absolutely unreal. And the history of the city is so messed up. The black population migrated from the South, trying to escape Jim Crow laws, but they suffered from so much repeated and blatant systemic racism and destruction of their communities. Even after the Civil Rights Act, white people were forcing segregated schools. White people and our government totally screwed the city, created a suburban sprawling expansion with absolutely no mass transit to keep low-income earners from jobs. Then they totally abandoned it when it started to get dangerous, because everyone refused to even acknowledge the decades of deplorable conditions they subjected the black population to. Then white people left, the remaining population couldn't afford taxes, and the city went bankrupt. It's a dark, disgustingly accurate depiction of just some of the country's systemic racism. Things like this need to be talked about more. Story 10. Back in high school, 1997 to 2001, I was very unhappy with my Catholic faith and was exploring other philosophies and faiths. In my internet searches, I came across Scientology. Knowing nothing, I began digging into it and almost immediately discovered Operation Clambake and other sources that shared the dark side of the cult and exactly what they get up to. Since then, it's been a topic I'm really fascinated by. It's not an obsession by any means, but pretty much any time I see a new book or documentary about Scientology, it immediately goes on my to read and watch list. Another rabbit hole, which I don't think many people are aware of at all, is the Royal Order of Jesters. They're a very secretive club within the Shriners. Since the Shriners are a club within Freemasonry, the Jesters are a secret club, within a secret club, within a secret club. They are invitation only, and asking for an invitation, or really referencing them at all, is a sure way to be blackballed. Their public face, as much as there is one, is that they are a social and entertainment group for wealthy men, and nothing more. And that would be easy to accept if they hadn't had some legal problems revolving around trafficking. A federal court in New York several years ago convicted several members, including a New York State Supreme Court justice, of trafficking for transporting girls across state and international lines. The FEC also investigated a Florida congressman about his ties to the organization and his use of campaign funds in club activities. According to the scant information available, the organization's brand of fun includes strippers and prostitutes, as well as drugs. So it's basically a kind of eyes wide shut thing. Anyway, it's not very well known, and with the whole Epstein story, as well as other similar stories, being so public, I'm surprised that the jesters have managed to remain under the radar. Story 11. If you're a tech minded person, especially historical tech, I highly recommend the book The Cuckoo's Egg by Clifford Stoll. The short summary is that Stoll was a systems administrator at Berkeley in the 80s. At the time, computer system time was still very expensive, and so departments at the university were billed for their time, much like how cell phone plans used to charge by the minute. Stoll was directed to track down a 75-cent discrepancy in the usage billing. He discovered that a hacker was using their servers to route his connection from overseas to other servers in the United States. Over the course of weeks, he tracked the hacker and discovered that they were located in West Germany and were hacking into US government and military servers to steal information, which they were then selling to the KGB. As you might expect, the feds eventually get involved, and Stoll is very funny in his retelling of how he has to explain to the non-tech minded feds exactly what's going on. And the story takes some really interesting turn. Story 12. Not sure if it can be considered a rabbit hole, but that one high school girl from Japan that was tortured by kids and later killed. I read about it as a kid when I was in the I love reading about creepy stories phase, and it really messed me up. I still remember it. I don't remember the name of the case, but with enough searching, you can find it. They took advantage of her, dropped weight on her stomach, so her internal organs were very messed up, and tortured her in numerous ways. Pretty sure in the end, they said if she wins some game, they will let her go. And when she won, they burned her alive. These kids are probably walking free today. Terrifying how kids can do that. It's not like they had a particular reason for that either. Just a sudden burst of malice, apparently. Story 13. Louisiana sleeping pills was a crazy one, and I can't find anything on it anywhere now. I saw it in a Wendigo video. He covers conspiracy theories, and it gives you a good spook if you listen to it. I forget the full context of the video, but essentially it was a chat room online that had a bunch of people talking about meeting up, parties, events, these sleeping pills, equipment, general topics for like a group of friends. Some internet people kept an eye out for it, just because it sounded weird. And well, with some deep diving research from our lovely friends on the internet, timings between some events listed and certain conflicts around the world led to weird consistency. Eventually, it was deduced that this chat room was being used by Spec Ops soldiers to communicate and time assassinations of major heads in terrorist organizations, with the term Louisiana sleeping pills referring specifically to bullets. Story 14. So, like, it's nothing big, but it's the only one I've come across myself and not seen online. I was on YouTube and wanted to travel down memory lane with classic ARGs, so I look up the name of one and it pops up, but besides it, there's a completely different video that looks similar, but was from an entirely different channel, and it was posted, I kid you not, 20 minutes beforehand. So I click on the channel and it has a bunch of videos in a similar style. Sadly, I can't remember the name or find it anymore. If you must know what ARG I was looking up, it's the one with the chick in the rabbit mask in front of something that looks to maybe be some sort of camper or RV. Story 15. I was 14, sneaking onto YouTube as usual to watch prank videos and roller coaster ride-ons. I somehow ended up watching one of Yo Mama's early Five Nights at Freddy's parodies. Being an animatronic nerd, I decided to research FNAF, and thus began a 3-month binge that led to me discovering the first 4 games: Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, ETH Goes Boom, plus all the song artists that I still follow today. Nate Wants to Battle, Try Hard Ninja, DA Games, The Living Tombstone, and CG5. Still love FNAF and other indie horror games like Bendy and the Ink Machine, Dark Deception, and Siren Head. Story 16. I have one, but it is very long, so if you are interested in it, you should listen to it. Cause Mathers. I once had my home Linux server hacked while I was away on winter holiday. Logging in remotely from my grandparents' house, I noticed that the server was behaving oddly, took a look at the log files and found them truncated, so sent a shutdown command so I could do forensics when I got home. What I ended up finding really did feel like swallowing the red pill. Someone had hacked the server using a recent sendmail exploit and resold it to someone who was using it to host an egg drop IRC bot. I logged into the IRC channel that it had been holding open and found a bunch of people sending short messages like CCs or root. About 5 minutes in, a longer message comes. Some guy is annoyed with the trade he has made. Someone gave him a bad set of data, and he wants to make his own data worthless in return before the buyer can get full use of it. So on my screen, there is suddenly a splat of information about some guy who lives in Texas, credit card, phone number, street address. And the first guy is urging everyone to buy stuff as quickly as possible before the credit limit is hit. Feeling I was messed, I disconnected ASAP, left an anonymous phone message on said Texas individual's answering machine, advising them to check their Visa charges, and hoped that my lack of foresight in not setting up an IP proxy or anything to hide my own identity wouldn't have either the FBI or organized crime breathing down my neck in a few days. Story 17. I bought my brother a taser from Amazon for his birthday one time. Looking at some of the questions there was one asking if it hurt. The answer went something like, "It does not. I've tasted myself in the neck 30 times. Very, very interested in this, I go to his Amazon profile, where you can see what else he has reviewed. And he reviewed a katana and stuff like that, of similar nature. Still interested, so I type his name into Facebook and find a profile with a picture of him holding his katana. The first thing I notice is that he's from my city. Second thing is, there are so many people posting to his Facebook saying he's the devil and they can't believe what he'd done and that they hope he rots and stuff like that. Extremely interested at this point, I Googled his name and found news articles that he stabbed a guy in the chest in his apartment with a katana, then fled and was later caught by police. Turns out he was very delusional and really needed help. He's now in jail, and according to the article, looks like he is getting the help he needs. It was a very wild ride, from just looking at the stupid questions people ask about products on Amazon. Story 18. I did a bit of research about school shootings around the world, from Columbine to the most recent one in Mexico at the time. It was terrifying to read the survivors' testimonies. I just imagined what would I do if that happened in my school, and ended up crying thinking about my little brother's fate in those circumstances. Also, the statistical analysis and studies about the topic are unnerving, since they seem to be more frequent globally every year. And I hated getting to know about those groups that praise shooters. I would prefer if I didn't know those exist. It's frustrating. Story 19. Deaths on Mount Everest, and how a lot of the bodies are still up there. This was a wiki rabbit hole I fell into after listening to the Case File episode on David Sharp. Read not only about him, but also Green Boots, this couple that got separated, etc. Due to the extremely cold temperatures, the bodies aren't that decomposed, so they still look recent even though it's been years or decades. It's creepy and sad. Some bodies have been there so long they are used as markers for climbers. What is also sad is that there have been efforts to remove them, but doing so is extremely dangerous because of the altitude, temperatures, and uneven ground. People have died attempting it in the past. Not sure if they've managed to succeed since I last read about it in 2018. Story 20, not really creepy, more of mentally challenging. It all started with me watching some random liminal space video with some slow, mildly distorted music, then decided to go down the comment section and stumbled upon some context about the music used. It was taken from Everywhere at the End of Time by The Caretaker, an album about the experience of suffering from Alzheimer's. Of course, I searched it up and listened to the full 6-hour album in one sitting, listening to 20s pop, progressing to music with the reverb toned really high, drone sounds, and a depressing ending. At that time, I was experiencing actual anxiety and developing the fear of forgetting. I was not mentally ready for Idiot, an interesting community though. Everyone felt the same way as I did about the masterpiece. Story 21. I was a lurker in a car forum for many years. This was probably 8 or so years ago. One time, someone posted a thread that linked to an insurance auto website that resold accident cars to reclaim money. There was a whole category of cars labeled Biohazard, and these are the cars that end up with body fluids in them. Giant crabs from being in an accident, drive-by shootings with blood everywhere, even cars with brains blasted on the roof. These auto auctions don't want to clean that mess up, so they will sell the cars cheap. Some people in the forum even found news articles that corresponded with the murder or accident, etc., in a particular car. It was incredibly creepy, but I admittedly spent hours and hours sometimes looking through these disgusting, tragic cars. Story 22. Damn, I wish I could remember his name. Years ago, I watched a video on YouTube of Elvis's last phone call, which was recorded. In the comments, there was this guy who had claimed to know Elvis personally and who went on about how he was in his final days. I grew very suspicious. I clicked his YouTube channel and found more comments on other dead celebrity videos of him claiming to be a family friend. I searched this guy's name and found his weird website. It was the most bizarre crap I've ever seen. It was full of long posts about how this guy was a lead designer and architect in some important buildings worldwide. It also chronicled all of his celebrity friends. Guy was definitely schizophrenic, I assume. Finding his website was just so odd. It's like looking into a portal into his mind. Since then, I've become very interested in schizophrenia, and I've happened to stumble upon others who seem to have it. This one guy on LinkedIn is a writer. He goes on these rambles on his LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter about a girl who was killed. But his sentences are all circular, if that makes sense. Almost like talking with someone with dementia who keeps repeating the same thing over and over. Except this guy has been doing the same thing for years. Just lost in a possible fairy tale. The mind is messed. Story 23. I watched Inception a little while ago, and I always loved the scene where they infiltrated the Winter Fortress. That had me thinking about those Hydra and James Bond-esque villain lairs up high in the snowy mountains, which I thought were a complete fantasy. That is, until I did lots of searching and asking around and slowly but surely learned that people with lots of money and connections can get away with pretty much anything on this planet, like building a lavish bunker on the side of a mountain in the Swiss Alps, which I mistakenly thought were sacred and untouchable. Laws are arbitrary when the price is right. These lavish bunkers are so well hidden and impossible to find that 99.9% of people won't ever know about their existence. Those that do are paid well to keep quiet. I even heard about one with a retractable helipad, so the entrance is essentially covered in snow and impossible to see, even from satellites. As someone who lives to explore, especially remote places, I naturally wanted to figure out how I could uncover the secret for myself. But digging more just led me to secretive people who would never disclose any clues and potentially jeopardize a location. It gives me the heebie-jeebies thinking about the power the 0.001% truly has and how no one really knows what they are doing behind closed doors. Money buys them their own set of rules. Those who know don't talk. Those who talk don't know.